Okay, our Prime Minister is in Israel on an official visit, and there's a lot going on with this visit, which we're going to unpack because global politics and diplomacy is fast becoming my favorite subject to deal with on this particular topic, on this particular show with you. Remember, Israel right now is under tremendous global scrutiny because of its handling of Gaza, the human rights violations, the civilian casualties, the humanitarian access that was blocked. Now there's conversation about what it's doing in the West Bank that's against international law. And of course, let's not forget Donald Trump's ambitious plan to turn Gaza into some kind of real estate promised land, pun intended. At the same time, globally, countries are being pushed to pick sides. Are you pro-Israel? Are you pro-Palestine? What's going on? Now, it's against that backdrop that the Indian Prime Minister is making his second visit to Israel. And, it's being seen as a political signal by both Israel's critics and its allies. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about what's at stake for India, how Narendra Modi's personal role in shaping the relationship between India and Israel in the last several years, India's position on Gaza and Palestine, the criticism that India has received about this visit. And finally, I'll also give you a backdrop of what our relationship has been with Israel since 1947 to where it is today. So before I get to it though, remember, like, share, subscribe, sign up for our membership, leave us a comment in the comment section. On this particular issue though, there are pros and cons on every side, and I'm really interested to know what you think because I think it's a very, very interesting question to be placed before you. Okay. So our Prime Minister is on his second visit, and this is a high-level visit with meetings focused on defense cooperation, technology partnerships, trade and regional security. Now, let's take a look at how both sides, the media has covered it. Israeli media is thrilled. They are calling this a strategically important visit because, of course, it comes at a time when Israel is being criticized globally. And several Israeli newspapers have highlighted India is, and I'm quoting here, a reliable long-term partner that has not withdrawn engagement at a time when Israel was diplomatically isolated. Now, you'll remember over the last couple of years, Israel has been pulled up in the United Nations, in international courts. There are countries that actually have warrants out for Netanyahu personally as a war criminal. At this time, this visit actually bolsters a friendship that most other countries are not willing to give Israel. Indian media has talked about defense, security cooperation, joint technology, trade expansion, and the symbolism of this visit. Very importantly, this is not a low-profile, quiet thing. This is not a conversation on the sidelines of a bigger event. This is a diplomatic visit, deliberate, choreographed, visible. It's drawing attention on purpose. Now, I have to give you some perspective, though. This is not the Prime Minister's first visit to Israel. Back in 2017, he became the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel ever. And that was when the relationship changed gears. Because until then, India had strong relationships with Israel, but we kept them out of the public view. So, forgive the analogy for the purists. I mean, you could say at that point, till that point, India and Israel had a bit of a situationship where basically there was a relationship that we didn't talk about in public. We were working together, but it was not something we came out and showed the world because publicly we had other voices that we had to also cater to. And I'll get into that detail a little further down in the video. It's not a situationship anymore because in 2017, Narendra Modi made it a public relationship. And you remember this photograph of the two of them with their trousers rolled up, walking down the beach. This became sort of a marquee photograph of where this relationship is headed and how close these two countries are. Since then, we've had defense cooperation. Israel became one of India's top 3 defense suppliers. India has become the top, if not the second, purchasers of military equipment from Israel, including defense systems, drones, radar, surveillance technology. There's also been cooperation on cybersecurity, counterterrorism, agriculture, water management, and innovation. So that visibility really has made the relationship blossom far more. But the reason why this conversation is perhaps different from the 2017 conversation that the 2017 visit of Narendra Modi is because of what happened in Gaza between then and now. And it has changed the world's view of Israel. Today, India is going to have to do three very difficult things. One is continue to maintain that strategic partnership with Israel. Two, preserve a long-standing view that India has always had, supporting a Palestinian state. And remember, Israel views support for a Palestinian state as very anti-Israel, right? And also, India does not want to be pushed into like a binary of pro-Israel or pro-Palestine global divide. We want to be able to stand in the middle and say we are not taking sides, which is what we have always done. I mean, look at how India has managed Russia and Ukraine, for example, and just sort of taken not picked sides. How India has managed the US and China and not picked sides. Similarly, that's the same diplomatic muscle that is being exercised over here as well. So if we break down what India has done so far, India did very publicly condemn the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. India was among the first major countries to come out and condemn that attack. In fact, what our Prime Minister said at that time was India stands in solidarity with Israel at this difficult hour. And that matters for India because we explicitly used the word terrorist for Hamas. There was no hedging, there was no both sides language, and in that moment it aligned very clearly with India's stance on terrorism, but also aligned clearly with Israel at that time. At the same time, though, while we made that statement, we've also not withdrawn our support for Palestinian statehood. Our External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, had said, and I quote, India's long-standing position on Israel-Palestine issues remain unchanged. We support a two-state solution that includes the establishment of a sovereign, independent, viable state for Palestine to live side by side with Israel in peace. And this is something India has supported from the beginning, Palestinian independent viable statehood, which, as you know, people in Gaza don't have. Concrete action, what this actually means is that India continues to recognize Palestine as a state. India maintains, diplomacy with the Palestinian Authority. We have sent, remember, humanitarian aid to Gaza, including medicines, relief material, and we've reiterated calls for civilian protection and humanitarian access. So what we're saying effectively is we support Israel's security, but we don't want to abandon the Palestinians. And we condemn Hamas, but we do not endorse the collective punishment that was being meted out in Gaza. Let's take a look at the voting behavior. There were several points, though, in the last couple of years when there were several United Nations resolutions that called for ceasefires in Gaza, and India abstained and did not vote for or against. And abstaining actually matters because what it gives you is strategic ambiguity, and it frustrates both camps because you're not picking a side, but it leaves all doors open to you. And I remember when this happened, and every time we would cover it, there would be a lot of disappointment from citizens who were worried about the sheer number of civilian deaths, mostly women and children, and the manner in which people were being, were suffering in Gaza at the hands of the Israeli army, and India not taking a side was something that people would found, upsetting whenever those stories came out that India had abstained. But it was what India was also doing, perhaps, whether we agree or not, was maintaining some sort of strategic ambiguity to be able to not show all your cards on the table, basically. What we've effectively done is separated Israel from Palestine diplomatically, saying basically this is not one file. So it could have been argued at one point this was one file as to how you deal with this issue. But effectively now India is dealing with this as two separate files. And you're engaging with Israel on defense, technology, security. You're engaging with Palestine in diplomacy and development. And one relationship doesn't necessarily hurt the other. Of course, there are two audiences to play to, the domestic audience. And let's be honest about this. Condemning Hamas also plays well domestically because Hamas is a Muslim extremist organization with a very violent history. And so this is the kind of organization that India will condemn, and it bodes well domestically also. And abroad, India has stressed on humanitarian law, civilian protection, diplomatic solutions, and carefully avoids any language that will alienate Arab partners in the West Asia area, because this is something that we care deeply about. So this is balance. And it's tricky balance because the Gaza war has made neutrality very difficult. It's difficult to pretend like we don't know what happened in Gaza. And so the balance becomes even more difficult because what happened in 2017 perhaps cannot be repeated right now because of what has happened in Gaza in the middle. So there's been a lot of criticism towards the government, towards the Prime Minister for this visit, come mostly from the opposition, like this tweet, for example, that came from Priyanka Gandhi, where she said, I hope the Honorable Prime Minister mentions the genocide of innocent men, women and children in Gaza while addressing the Senate, which is the parliament in Israel, which he's going to address, which is considered a very honorable welcome if that's what has been offered. India stood for what is right throughout history as an independent nation, and we must continue to do so. So the criticism really that the country is receiving is in three buckets. One, the moral position, where opposition leaders are arguing that India has historically stood with Palestine and what is going on now at the time when Palestine really needs us. Why have we switched sides? Two, the timing. They're questioning the decision to engage with Israel so visibly while military operations continue in Gaza, in spite of the fact that there was a ceasefire, while there are problems in the West Bank as well. Why are you doing this now? And third, the diplomatic optics. They're arguing that deepening defense ties now appears like unconditional support, regardless of India's official statement. So you could say whatever you want, but what you're doing means something else. So these are three, buckets of criticism that the government has received with regard to this particular visit. But I do want to give you the other side of the story. And in order to understand the other side of the story of why the government is doing what it's doing, we have to go back into the history. And this is where I'll take you into history so that you can decide which way you believe India should be going, right? So India's relationship with either Israel or Palestine did not start now with this government. It dates back to our independence and their sort of formation of their countries as well. So if you go back to 1947, just weeks after independence, at that point, when Jawaharlal Nehru was in charge, India voted against the United Nations partition plan that was going to split up Palestine into two and create an Israel. At that time, Nehru, who was a strong voice, but a stronger voice than that was Mahatma Gandhi, who opposed the partition of Palestine on moral and colonial grounds. Now, think back to the kind of India that was at that time. We had also been split down the middle. We were also recovering from 200 years of colonialism. So India at that point was strongly against any sort of opposition based on religion. We were standing in solidarity with all Arab nations, all nations that the British had ruled colonially before that. We saw a kinship with those countries and a sensitivity to domestic opinion, because at that time we had a great fervor that was anti-colonial in India. We had just fought for our independence, and so we were very clear that we would not side with those Western colonial powers. And India saw Palestine through this anti-imperial lens. It was not geopolitics, it was a kinship at that time. In 1950, India formally recognized Israel as a country, but we did not establish any diplomatic relations with them. So it was a compromise. Again, under Nehru, India acknowledged the existence of the new country, but refused any sort of political closeness, because at that point, we believed we were a leader of the non-aligned movement, which was really important. And that is where our entire history of not taking sides comes from. We do not align. And during the Cold War specifically, we did not pick a side. It's who we are. We've always been this. We were a champion at that time of decolonialization across Asia, across the Arab countries, and across Africa. And we were also dependent on West Asian oil and trade, and those were relationships we needed to manage. Between 1950 and 1960, India publicly supported Arab states and the Palestinian cause very clearly, especially at the United Nations. What changed though? India actually went to 3 wars, you'll remember, at that point. China in 1962, twice with Pakistan in 65 and 71. So what happened during those wars is that India and Israel quietly began engaging learning, intelligence sharing, military supplies, security advice. And there are former RAW officials who have now come out and talked about it. So B. Raman, for example, who's a former additional secretary, cabinet secretary at RAW, actually wrote a book about how Israel became a quiet but reliable intelligence partner in 1962. Then again in 65 and 71, former Israeli ambassador Gideon Meir actually confirmed Israeli assistance to India in 71, where Israel supplied India with arms and intelligence in that war. Publicly, India under Indira Gandhi remained firmly pro-Palestinian. And you remember this visual of Indira Gandhi and Yasser Arafat. Indira Gandhi's worldview was shaped by and remained anti-imperial. It remained, remember, we had very close ties with the Soviet Union at that point, and leadership in the non-aligned movement. There was a Cold War on, and we refused to take sides in that Cold War. So what it was here is just Cold War realism, where there were two sides. On one hand, there was intelligence sharing and military ability sharing with Israel. And on the other hand, there was a very clear, unarguable pro-Palestinian view that we had at that time. In 1974, India became the first non-Arab country to officially recognize the Palestinian Liberal Organization, or the PLO. We gave them an office in Delhi as well. In 1988, India formally recognized the state of Palestine, which we still do. We have diplomatic relations with Palestine. Full diplomatic relations with Israel started in 1992 under P.V. Narasimha Rao as Prime Minister, where we opened embassies in New Delhi and in Tel Aviv. What had changed between Indira Gandhi and Narasimha Rao? The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union had collapsed. India began its economic liberalization. The Arab unity had started to fracture. Oslo process was underway as well. So it was a different world per se in that way. So there was a recalibration of all of those relationships. Between 92 and 2014, until Prime Minister Modi took over, under Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh, we expanded our relationship with Israel in defense, in intelligence, in agriculture, water technology, counter-terrorism. India still remained cautious. None of these prime ministers visited Israel up until that point, and this high-level engagement was still kept discreet. It was not public. Support for Palestine continued in international forums, and India continued to balance optics very carefully. 2014 onwards, Narendra Modi came in, took over, made it explicit. He became the first prime minister, as I was telling you earlier, to visit Israel. Barefoot walk on the beach with Bibi. The shift was not about abandoning Palestine, because they have made statements over and over again about it, but it has been viewed very clearly as taking sides. And that's the balance, really, and the context that we're actually talking about. Remember, India has now become a chief buyer of drones, surveillance, radar, battlefield surveillance systems, cybersecurity, digital surveillance capabilities, all of which are being used at the border at our various points in our country. So whether that's the line of control with Pakistan, the line of actual control, on the Chinese borders, we're using a lot of this equipment that we've got from Israel. There's also the question of Pegasus. You'll remember was asked and never quite adequately answered. Pegasus is a spyware developed in Israel that can access phones remotely, can read your messages, it can activate your microphone and your camera of your phone without your permission. The Indian government has neither confirmed nor denied purchasing or using Pegasus, but Israel is globally accepted to be among the leaders of surveillance technology, not just to be used militarily, but also to be used domestically and to survey their own people, the people of Palestine and the people on the West Bank. So there are many, many gray areas there. There are many questions of how things are done. For example, if in the West Bank, they feel that there is a Palestinian who has supported Hamas in any way or gone against the Israeli government in any way, they bulldoze their house. There are several other such examples where the learning sort of colors outside the lines of what is military diplomacy. But this is the backdrop of this entire relationship. So, on one side, there are those who say, hey, India needs the equipment that Israel is able to share with us, and we need to maintain this relationship now publicly because we don't like Hamas, we don't like Muslim extremism, we don't like violence, we don't like terrorism, and they are absolutely right. And on the other side, there are those that say, hey, from the days of Mahatma Gandhi to who we are right now, India has stood against colonial occupation. We have stood with the people of Palestine. We have always believed the people of Palestine were wronged from the Nakba of the 1940s to what has happened now in Gaza. And at a time when the people of Palestine need us the most, we can't possibly be flipping and changing our tune. These are two sides to that story. I'll leave it up to you. I know how I feel, but I'm not going to put it out there because I don't want to color your opinion. So I'm going to leave it up to you. Leave me a comment in the comment section on what you think India should be doing, because this is what diplomacy is about. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. It's always about, maintaining relationships so that in the future, when you need someone, they can come in handy. So let me know what you think. I'm very curious. And let me know if there are any other stories that we should be breaking down for you.